I'm going to flip the slide over to myself and Doran just to give you a little bit of background, and then I'll turn it over to Doran to kind of get his part in, and then we'll get you going. So again, my name's Chris Maroon. I've been at CyberArk for going on 10 years, which is hard to believe that it's gone by that fast. I'm one of the senior directors of our global technology office, and what that means is that I've been at CyberArk for a really long time. But really am in on the team that's responsible for the go-to-market strategies of where CyberArk is going in the next, decade and decades to come. I've specialized in a lot of the cloud strategy products and solutions and kind of like targets as far as like what we want to protect as far as like every organization goes. So looking forward to talking with everybody today. Really curious about what kind of questions you might have. I'm really excited to share the stage with my good friend Doran. I'll let him take it away and do a quick intro and we'll get going.
Thanks, Chris. And hello, everyone. As Chris said, my name is Doran. I lead the digital identity services in Canada for Accenture. I had the privilege to be in the identity space for more than a decade now, which means I've seen the traditional identity and access management models that was a long time ago, and started to see the vision of the cloud and how clients now actually moving into it. So I'm really happy to be in this session and provide our experience and expertise to see how can we secure the cloud identities.
Amazing. So just a little bit on the topics of discussion. I know everybody saw the abstract. What we kind of signed you up for today is really a discussion rather than a scripted presentation. I think that Doran and I are with our experiences, and as we're going through this, we're going to try to help make sure that you guys understand what we've seen and what we've seen others do, and maybe can need a little bit of help in some of that guidance. But we're going to talk about, well, some people might have failed, others have definitely achieved, but where somebody might have failed and we learned some lessons and valuable lessons on securing digital identities, whether that's in the cloud or even potentially on-prem. But then how it's changing and the modern technologies and digital transformation is trying to get as much into the digital or non-human activity moving. But of course, humans have identities, but so do the non-human activities also need identities. So we'll kind of bridge that gap a little bit. And then, of course, leading into excessive permissions across the cloud for both human and non-human. Now, we also want to kind of put in kind of our experience and our expertise into kind of adopting that digital transformation and digital identity strategy for the cloud, and what some of those key initiatives should be taken into consideration when you're kind of getting that ball rolling. So we're going to start it off by kind of putting some thoughts into your brain. Right? We don't necessarily need you to respond. If you'd love to respond and you kind of think that we should know, it'd be great to put that into the chat. But it's really just to kind of get the wheels spinning. We start talking about living on the edge, and I think that the pandemic, just me talking to some of the customers out there, the pandemic kind of pushed along a lot of the things that probably should have taken a little bit more time with some thought and some planning and some procedures around moving to the cloud and that digital transformation. So while you're kind of going through this next part, because we have a few of these polls that we want you to kind of consider to yourself, is what are you looking for in the cloud to utilize? Meaning that everybody has a reason to move to the cloud, whether that's digital transformation or lift and shift data centers or taking advantage of different SaaS applications. But what are you looking forward to as far as like using the cloud, right? We understand that that's a little bit of a living on the edge, and we know that there's probably some technical debt where the pandemic had maybe pushed you in. But we've kind of got some experiences with some of the customers. And I think, Doran, in your eyes and in some of your experience, where have you seen some of those benefits and, of course, some of the challenges that kind of came along with that movement?
Thanks, Chris. So this is a really deep question, right? And I think it dates back in the 1950s when the cloud computing was started to be created as a concept, and it's really just in the last decade when we see this vision actually being implemented across the organization. generally speaking, we see a couple trends or why the clients are moving into the cloud. Some of them are really looking for innovation. When I know it may be sound like a buzzword, but what it really means, it means that not spending that much time on the technology or the platform or the services that you need, because they are really at your fingerprints, and focus on the business value. So if I need to innovate, I need to create a new service for the citizens or for consumers, for anyone. The platform is ready, up and go. Others are looking for flexibility in terms of and being more elastic on the existing services. So some clients say, look, I have a bottleneck every time when I need to create a new service for the customers. It takes time, and I cannot size exactly the technology footprint. So I need that for flexibility to scale up and down as I go. Right. The others are looking for, well, I need to provide my services really fast now, and I don't want again to spend time on the technology stack. I want to, me as a customer, I want my clients to have access to my services as soon as possible. So generally speaking, I would see, if I would summarize really in a couple of bullet points. Those will be, the customers don't want to be in the business of owning an infrastructure anymore, and focusing really on the business value. So consume services, having the ability to be flexible and elastic in terms of how I dial up and dial down the service that I have, but also being able now to focus more on the business value and continuous innovation, with the platform being the fingerprint. Chris, did you see similar trends, or do you
Oh
have?
yeah. I mean, of course, right? Scalability is one of those things that, of course, we bring up the topic of moving to the cloud doesn't necessarily mean that it's cheaper, right? I don't think anybody is moving to the cloud to try to save their company, millions of dollars. But we are seeing, some of that CapEx cost kind of go down, but they're looking for more of that. I think the last bullet point on the benefit side, the continuous innovation is really hitting the nail on the head there, because some of the services that are allowed or involved with the cloud, more specifically infrastructure and platform as a service, allows organizations to move more rapidly when it comes to their business and their efficiency to make more money and faster. And I think that, having that as an opportunity is giving guys and companies the green light to go ahead and get it moving, go ahead and move it as fast as possible. And that's where the challenges come into play, right? And I think you've probably seen a lot of the challenges where, the continuous innovation and then the move to scalability is like, greener grass on the other side of the fence. But then sometimes it's like, well, wait a minute, what did we just leave behind us? Which is a bunch of challenges, right?
Right. Well, I totally agree. Right. So, the move to the cloud model doesn't happen overnight. It is a journey. Some of my clients say, look, a journey means that it doesn't end. Ultimately, it should end, meaning changing from the on-prem where possible, completed to the cloud. But until we get that state, it's always be a hybrid model. We'll always have a coexisting model where we have on-prem services and technology footprint with the cloud now footprint. So we'll have to manage both sides. So how that translates into identity challenges is really just to start from top-down approach, is that in the cloud model, everything has an identity. Even the new networks, I would say, models that even the Cisco can come up with, they all identity-based networks. So everything, a device, a resource, and a user identity, an application, it's attribute. It has an attribute that's a unique identifier that ultimately has to manage, irrespective of its life cycle. Some can live for longer periods, some of that not. But that I would say is one of the key challenges, that since everything has an identity, it needs to be managed, visible in a way or another. Because if it's not, that's where the risk is exposed. Some clients are not comfortable with about the confidentiality. It's okay, well, my data is up there in now. I think that that mindset will eventually go away. What I mean by that, it means that as more controls and ownership of the security controls will be implemented, the confidentiality aspect will be as managed as good as it was in a traditional on-prem solution. And now, because we have now automation, it comes as a must in the cloud. And the reason is that you cannot be in the cloud expecting to be providing fast services, but in the same time you manage your identities still in a manual way. So you'll always be behind. So the both have to go hand in hand. But with automation, that means it means now you're building new automated processes, and you need technology solution that can facilitate that. More customers we see go into the DevOps model. Some may be in the different journey, but eventually looking to benefit from the speed of developing new applications and promoting to the code. And that means, again, each application has an identity, talking application to application, how you manage those secrets. So the bottom line is that everything, it's tied to an identity, and in a way or another, it has to be managed.
Yeah, and I see that kind of leads to a lot of open holes, right? Because the business kind of drives the need for faster, more efficient DevOps processes and getting new applications out there, getting changes done a lot quicker. It tends to lead behind a lot of technical debt. And that's what we kind of see all over the place is, when I was talking about greener grass, right, you see that, this is my kind of interpretation of, here's this nice pretty lawn, and, it's got, a sidewalk, and, how, your neighbors are, they walk their dogs, and, people like to play, and children chasing, soccer balls all over the place. And eventually, you can put a sign on the front door that says, well, please stay off my grass. Right. And then it leads to, well, maybe what about this other section of the grass? I'll put another sign over there. Please don't, walk on my grass. And then it leads to another sign because you got this one little patch over here. But then eventually you end up with signs all over the place. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, well, wait a minute, like, I don't want anybody touching my stuff. And the analogy here is that you can put signs up all over the place that says, please don't breach me. Please don't breach my organization. Even though there might be holes all over the place where somebody could just kind of walk in at any given time, you try to put up as many signs or as many blockers as possible to prevent people from going in. But what we have to do in that situation is that we have to assume breach, right? And this has happened more and more frequently because of the speed of digital innovation and digital transformation, is that we might as well just say, you know what, come on, walk on the grass, figure it out, because we're going to assume that we're going to be breached. The FBI says it all the time. They say that, you have to assume breach. If you haven't been breached yet, you will be in the future at some point. Something that you have is something that an attacker wants or feels like he needs to have. So prioritization and visibility is being able to say that, hey, I understand that there are holes in the network, that there are holes in the environment that we need to close, and being able to prioritize them is something that is a trivial and sometimes tricky thing to do. But you want to kind of, like I said, assume breach and try to close the holes as much as possible, the ones that are very high exposed down to the ones that aren't so exposed. Being consistent across different environments. It's something that we'll probably talk more about today with humans and non-humans being those machines. We want to make sure that the security controls are the same across the board. And being really, really good at the basics. Now, the reason I say really twice is because you have to make sure that the core concepts are down and making sure that those holes are closed, making sure that you're removing things like local administrator on different laptops and workstations and whatnot, being able to make sure that credentials across the board aren't exposed or static in any way, shape, or form. And then, of course, integrating all of these things together. But don't take just my word for it. I mean, the reason that we have the expert with us, Mr. Doran, is that, the organization that he works for has put together some statistics that I think is really important that we share with you guys.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so just to follow up on that a little bit is that uh, what we found, we did our own, I would say, checks with the clients that we work, but also looking through some analyst report. We said we found out that more than 70% of all the organization that at least we had exposure found that they will change the way how they interact with the customer. And the customer in this sense means the user that they serve. So it could be citizens, it could be a true commercial customer. And so they're looking at the cloud capability to see how can I bring those services faster. But in the same time, we're looking, okay, so but 80% of most of the breaches are tied to passwords and accounts. So now, if you multiply that with the speed how it goes into the cloud, you can picture a trend that it won't go down. It's still those breaches will happen, and the average cost of a breach last year was close to $4 million. So multiply by how many breaches we had, that's a pretty significant number.
Yeah, I think everybody on this webinar would appreciate that 3.8 million attached to their salary versus taking away for a breach cost, including myself. I'll vote for that. These are insane statistics, and I think we'll put some numbers up a little bit later in the presentation. But we want to kind of get your thoughts. And again, this is another poll, if you will. Please put the information in the chat just so that way everybody can kind of see. But we've seen a difference in a lot of different organizations in regards to who manages all of this stuff, right? Is it a team? Is it one person? But in your organization, is it a team or a single person that manages security and permissions and access control, or more specifically, IAM for the cloud, meaning IaaS and platform as a service, et cetera, but also the identities that just use the cloud. Think SaaS, think, I need to log into AWS to spin up a workspace so I can do specific jobs on a Windows box or a Unix box, whatever that may be. But please feel free to share your thoughts with what your organization looks like from a security perspective as to who manages it. Is it just one person? Is it a team that manages all of these things? Because what we found in some of our experience is that we've got a guy named Tony. I'm just going to introduce to you to a fictitious character named Tony, but Tony has a lot of twins out there in the market space. But Tony is an individual that maintains a lot of different types of environments, whether it's AWS, Azure, GCP, but also has cloud native apps and SaaS apps that he needs to be able to provide permissions to. Now, of course, Tony has a lot of people depending on him, right? You've got the administrators of AWS, you've got DevOps engineers, developers that need to be able to manage databases and things like that, need to be able to extend their workloads into Lambda functions and services within Azure, et cetera. You've got apps and workloads and even vendors that potentially need to log into those environments. But also the customers are touching those environments, right? I have a web page, I have services and e-commerce and things like that that are on those web pages. And those services are hosted inside of AWS or GCP or whatever. But then your entire workforce, what about Office 365 and Salesforce and all these different types of applications that run on the SaaS? So Tony's got a lot of stuff on his to-do list, right? There's, securing those access, protecting the SaaS apps, and really Tony's day just becomes really cloudy. And if he's just one guy or a very small team, what ends up happening is it becomes very overwhelming for Tony to keep up. Now, I'm going to introduce to you to a graph that is continuously moving and growing. And this is just across AWS, Azure, and GCP alone. So if we take a look at kind of the starting date over on the left-hand side, the starting date for this was April of 2020. Now, across those three different IaaS platforms, in April of 2020, there were about 15,000 permissions. Now, think about each one of the services like RDS or EC2 or VMs within Azure or different projects within GCP. We need permissions to be able to administer those different services within those platforms. Now, of course, as a new service comes on, let's say it's Alexa for Business or it's a new workspaces service, then you've got to attach permissions to that. So it jumps up to 16,000. And then a few months later, it jumps to 19,000. And if we fast forward to just this past couple months, July of 2021, we're now at 24,000 and change, and this is actually now just over 25,000, and from the August report that we just got. But you're talking about an exponential growth over the last 12 to 24 months worth of time frame as AWS, Azure, and GCP continuously grow their services that are involved. We're going to continuously add permissions that have come along to it. Now, those guys like Tony says, oh my gosh, well, how am I supposed to keep up with this? Where I've got a customer that says, hey, I need to be able to access RDS. I need to add databases to AWS. Okay, I'm going to give you access to this. Well, then that developer returns back to Tony and says, hey, I got to have some IAM permissions because I can't assign permissions to the RDS databases that I'm spinning up. Well, then Tony, the cloud architect, says, well, what permissions? And he's like, I don't know, just give me full access. And so Tony just says, okay, here's full access. And that is actually a true story from one of our customers that really just don't have the knowledge of what all of these things do. And he doesn't really have the time to turn each dial to making sure that we know exactly what's happening. So what you end up with is this very over permissioned environment, which of course creates some other key statistics. Now, if we look at what Doran was referring to earlier, 19% of those data breaches involved just misconfigured cloud servers. I think everybody on this call can assume just every breach that we've heard about over the last 24 months, there's probably some misconfiguration in some cloud, either database or web service or some type of cloud environment that has led to a very significant breach. Now, of course, you can see that 23,000 plus, those were the permissions, and you saw the graph. And then, of course, here we are looking at data that's a year old, right? 4.4 million, right? We're at the same 4 million mark for the average cost of a data breach. And of course, the number one reason is just over permissioned accounts and roles in those cloud services is a huge reason, the number one reason why those breaches continuously happen. So I want to kind of dive into one specifically just to give you some very detailed example. So there was a cyber attack, of course, that was essentially a over permissioned AWS account. Now, this AWS account was in fact configured at the time as they were building out this AWS account that had some permissions in it that over the course of time just got maybe forgotten. They were forgotten in some way, shape, or form that allowed the attacker's IP address to be allowed into that AWS account through the firewall. So that WAF, which is just the firewall role, had a configured role that was allowed to be able to set up that AWS account for the purposes of the business, which had attached to it two very specific commands. The first one was the list bucket command. And in AWS, with the S3 service, if you have the list bucket command and it's not in any way, shape, or form listed to one very specific subsets or one ARN, it's allowing that attacker to list every single S3 bucket that is inside of that S3 service. Now, of course, that sync bucket command was basically the straw that broke the camel's back, which allowed that attacker to synchronize all of that data outbound. And of course, we all probably know about this attack, and it lasted for such a long time because the permissions were in fact okay at the start of the configuration of this AWS account. And it wasn't until somebody was bragging about this that that attacker was in fact caught. Now, this is something that kind of leads us to some of the statistics that Doran shared and that I shared, but it just goes to show you that these misconfigurations on these cloud services and these cloud servers are very, very serious, because if you're storing a lot of good customer data or intellectual properties, they can be attached to a breach. So this is one of the things that we like to talk about because it's super crucial, but we have not only those external, internal threats that are represented by the people in this photograph, or this slide deck, right? It's also the non-humans. And I'll take a quick pause here after I kind of let this example kind of roll through to let Doran share some of his experiences. But we all know that there's developers, right? Bill, the organic developer that has a clear identity, that has a defined role, that is able to multi-factor because he has a phone in his hand or an old key fob or whatever the case may be. But, he's happy. He knows what he's supposed to do every single day. But then you get the non-organic, right? The app, right? The app that's kind of coming in and saying, well, I just need to do this, this, and this. And there's no real clear identity because, essentially that application is defined by a human, and that human may not know exactly what service they need. It doesn't really have a clear identity. It doesn't have a defined role because it's just meant to do things automatically. And sometimes we can kind of ignore the fact that, oh, it's just an application. It's not human. It's not going to make a mistake. It's only doing what it's told. Well, if it's told to do mistakes or not prevent it from making mistakes, other attackers can take advantage of those rules because we may not tie multi-factor authentication to it simply because it is an application, and we may not be able to do that. So what we want to do is we want to form a way where the non-organic application can have an identity, can have a defined role, and we're able to multi-factor in some way, shape, or form. And that is possible using today's solutions, being able to make sure that applications are only given the access that they need all the way through their day-to-day jobs. Now, we've seen this from time and time again to code sitting out on GitHub that has access keys, that have secret keys out there, and that they're available publicly. Still today, we've been presenting this topic and this example for years. I remember the last time that we were able to do something in person at an RSA event, we were actually showing this in live format, meaning logging into GitHub, doing a code scan, and being able to see where access keys and secret keys are still available. And of course, here we are today, and we can still go out there and find out that they are there. So we understand that humans have identities and that they need to be able to use it, but we also understand that there's non-human applications that we need to tie to identities because they're there for a very specific reason, whether it's a DevOps process or it's a script that gets run or it's Terraform applying and creating new entities inside of a cloud platform. We need to make sure that those entities and those identities are secure and that we're doing everything that we can to prevent them from being used maliciously. But Doran, in your eyes and in your experience, have you seen a lot more of the non-human side of the house kind of like take shape or take form into the security realm? And are your customers that you've been involved in, are they actually taking advantage of some of the security tools to secure those non-human identities?
It's a really good question, Chris, and thank you for that. So we actually see the line between the non-human and human accounts being a bit blurred a little bit. And what I mean by that, especially on the non-humans, traditionally we were thinking, okay, those will be just infrastructure accounts, or will be network device accounts now, or the root accounts, administrator accounts at OS level. Now we see the non-human accounts being the line being blurred, including RPA accounts. So yeah, we see clients that try to benefit from a lot of automation, and what we see in the market, that it means that the RPA accounts now are being treated as a human account from the lifecycle perspective, because it does the same activities, it has the same privilege as a human account, but even from the governance perspective, that's being treated, okay, it has an identity associated with it, and I've seen actually clients giving names so that it can be identified something similar to a human account, but it's actually a non-human account. On top of that, the IoT devices, smart cities, and in OT environment, in the pipelines that we see, those are still non-human accounts, and they have more privileges than I would say a human account. So if you ask me, the number of non-human accounts are significantly higher than the human accounts, and that's by nature. But now with the smart technologies, and I said like with all the intelligent devices and RPAs and so on, that number grows just exponentially.
Yeah, it's
One
good that.
last thing I was going to say, sorry, Chris, for that. So when we say breach, a lot of clients think of individuals think that okay, this is an event that happened one point of time. Like today, it's a breach. The reality is it is not. The reality is that the breach lasts for a very long time. And our experience, it like on average, it lasts more than 12 months. So which means we detected the breach now, but it actually happened, and that leak probably happened in the last 12 months or so.
Yeah, that's a significant number, and I think Mandiant always kept up with that number, and we used to use it a lot of on our demos. And then I think Accenture also keeps up with those numbers as far as like what's the average amount of time that an attacker is in your environment before you even have a clue. And that's the big part, and that's why I think like going back to what we were stating at the very beginning is you have to assume breach. You have to assume that there's somebody in your environment that is just coasting along utilizing permissions that are out there because it's just normal. It just looks normal. Even though it's not, it just looks normal. And RPA is a really good example of that. I'm glad you brought that up. I don't think we talked about that before, but we see companies growing with RPA all of the time. Now it's doing human style, activities, but it is of course a non-human actor, and utilizing that functionality is something that's crucial because it does extend the business and the efficiency of the business. If it's a repeatable task, why not just throw a robot on it and just let it do its thing, multiple times a day or whatever. So that's a great point. Kind of switching topics a little bit, but kind of staying on that same realm. The last poll that we have for you guys today is thinking about the humans and the non-humans, right? How difficult is it to achieve least privilege, or of course the fun buzzword of zero trust within your organization? Of course, again, please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. But we see this a lot is that the zero trust model or the least privilege model sometimes can be really difficult because of the way that people ask for things, and they may not know what they need, so they're just going to ask for everything under the sun. Of course we all do it, right? I'm very guilty of that when I go shopping for cars. I want it all, but I don't want to pay for it. And of course, if we think about least privilege and the challenges that kind of come along with it, everybody knows that it's an issue, right? Least privilege is a practice of restricting those capabilities to those who require them. Okay, fair enough. That's pretty easy to say, but when reality sets in, it's a little bit harder to achieve that. If you remember my example of the developer that needed access to RDS and then IAM on top of that, well, I don't know what this person needs, but they're asking for whatever they can get because it's just easier to ask for more than you actually need, because you can develop, you can do the things that you need to do, you can do your job. As an old system administrator myself, I'd say, yeah, just give me a domain admin account and then you don't have to worry about me ever again. Well, I'm not giving you a domain admin account, but you can have, these rights. Well, yeah, but I can't do this, this, and this. And so, which leads into that challenge of least privilege is not just with the cloud, but it's certainly extended from the on-prem or self-hosted environments into the cloud because the mentality has stayed the same. I need entitlements. I need to start with just allow all. Just let me do everything I need to do and you can trim it back later. Of course, this leads into that technical debt that we keep talking about, right? Where users are going to request more permissions than they actually need, which then in turn comes into a very, very difficult way and complex way of analyzing what the user is actually doing versus what they actually need to do. Wait a minute, you took a permission from me. Well, I used that permission. Well, sir, you didn't use it. I mean, maybe the last time was 8 months ago. Well, yeah, but there's going to be a time that I'm going to need it. And of course, that's where the snowball effect kind of kicks in, is that it's hard to analyze actual user activity and providing them the permissions that they actually need. So we've kind of come up with some guidelines on, a new standard or for a new standard on this cloud least privilege model, is that it always starts with visibility, knowing the permission risk and knowing when somebody's using things, or is there a different way that we can certify that this person needs that permission, and implementing that least privilege throughout the cloud estate. But again, it's not just the cloud estate. It's going to be whatever is self-hosted on premise. Think about laptops and workstations and even servers setting up that least privilege environment. Nothing should change in moving to the cloud. If those identities in the cloud need permissions to do things, sure, allow them, but don't leave them there. Look at a zero trust model as I'm going to give you the least amount as possible, but if you need to escalate into an operational move forward to do different things and more elevated tasks, that's fine. Let's come up with processes that allow that, whether it's enforcing, multi-factor authentication when those step-up auths are needed, or potentially even utilizing an account that is managed and controlled by a vault that allows CyberArk to say, here's your account, go do what you need to do. And then you do that, and then we have a secure audit trail on what that person did, and then we can rotate credentials and wipe away breadcrumbs at the end of the day, right? It's reducing risk and measuring progress. We can reduce risk by saying, let's cut out all of the potentially orphaned access that has come out in the past, and let's measure the progress by saying, yes, we can see that our efficiency is still on an upward trend and that we're not losing, efficiency by integrating all of the different CyberArk solutions to make sure that that happens. So Doran, any comment here about, kind of the thought process with your customers and the people that you've spoken with in a least privilege model, and how difficult that might be to achieve, but with the right tools in place, it can be a lot easier?
Absolutely. So, traditionally, we were talking about need to know and a least privileged model. Essentially, you strip out down all the access and leaving it just on what is needed, which work, I would say, okay in the past, and that's still relevant. What we think we see challenges with now, especially with the cloud, is that sometimes it cannot be as granular as it was in the traditional model, and just giving just the least privileged access creates a little bit of friction in the user experience. So that's how the zero trust model now complements that concept. And I don't want to overcomplicate things, but what it means, generally speaking, is essentially, okay, even if I have the least privileged access and I try to log in to my server, to my infrastructure or my business application, how do I guarantee that that individual, that identity is claiming who he or she is, or that object for that matter, the application. So you cannot just rely on the one-to-one relationship, right? So me logging into a server and server trust, okay, it's the login and password, so we're good to go. So this is where the concept of zero trust comes in, saying, well, I need someone else to guarantee or provide that assurance that actually that individual or application or RPA object is who it's claiming to be. So that's where we see CyberArk comes into the play, being that broker, if for lack of a better word, saying, okay, I'm not doing a direct connection, I'm doing it through CyberArk. CyberArk is vouching that assures for me, and that's for privileged access. Now with the identity and access management solution as well, application to application. So if you went back to your question, Chris, what do we see a customer say? Well, to implement a zero trust, it cannot be just one relationship. You cannot have an application talk to another application. It has to be a third entity into this mix to guarantee or provide that assurance.
I mean, it's like having an automated, traffic cop, or,
Exactly.
automated access police, right? Because it's like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to think about it. I just want something to kind of keep up with that permission stack and making sure that it's not only enforced, but the automation and delivery of new of new services is something that's possible from a permissions perspective. So, and that's what we kind of think about as well, that from a visibility analysis and remediation perspective is we want to continuously reduce risk, because if we go back to that example of here's a developer, he needs access to these services, and we've got, whoa, wait a minute, you need IAM permissions as well. Sure, I'm just going to throw it at you. But if we're continuously analyzing it and seeing what risky permissions are there and that person is not using them, then you can trim back all the unnecessary permission sets. And that makes the continuous risk reduction an automated thing where we don't have to worry about, looking and doing things manually. So having automation, having something doing that traffic policing or access policing is something that's huge and absolutely necessary. And if we think about the most important steps is to detect where permission and resources are being utilized. What does somebody actually need access to within the cloud, whether that's a SaaS application or an infrastructure as a service platform? And we want to identify where risky permissions might be in play, risky access might be in play, risky SaaS access might be in play, or whether or not MFA is being used to certify that those people are who they say they are before they log on. But also having the capability of visualizing all of that, being able to see the relationships between the people that are utilizing it, the non-human applications that are utilizing those resources, and what they're actually doing. And that's something that's super crucial and not always easy, especially if you think about islands of security. It's like AWS has their own bits and Azure has their own bits, and so does every SaaS application. And we want a way of being able to see across the board. And that's something that I know that CyberArk is trying to make sure that we provide our customers a way of being able to do all of that. So just kind of moving forward until we get to kind of a little bit more of the consultative side of this presentation, we want to think about unifying cloud access. We want to make sure that there's a way for an end user just to do their job. That's why they're there. They're there to help make the company money. Us being involved in security, we want to make sure that the backend experience is a lot easier for administrators to be able to allow those folks to do their job, because you know that a chief operating officer is going to come in and say, no, I need this to happen because this is how our company makes money. And if these people can't make money for a company, then security is just not going to have a role in all of this. So we want to make sure that it's easy and automated as much as possible for us to be able to discover what's happening out there, creating new policies. Oops, sorry about that. Creating new policies, and then of course monitoring the session that is happening, whether that's an actual session to a target system or whether it's cloud logs and threat detection. All of those things really need to be in place, but we need to make sure it's as efficient as possible for end users to do their job. Getting to an application utilizing adaptive MFA and secure sign-on. Just-in-time access is something that we've been asked by our customers a lot lately. So I know that we're going to kind of move forward in this, and I really want to kind of get that into the front of this conversation, is being able to talk a little bit about just-in-time. How do we make this easier for customers? And I think, Doran, you hit the nail on the head with the next slide of being able to say, how do we move to the cloud? We talked about it at the beginning. Everybody has a need and a reason to move to the cloud, but you hit all of the challenges and how privileged access capabilities can help. So I'll let you take lead here and get us going on this part of the conversation.
Thanks, Chris. So we talked about the challenges, and I'll just, as a quick reminder, right? It's the confidentiality that clients are not, organizations are not comfortable just yet to putting the data up there, if that's even a way to explain it. Automation, DevOps, and fast provisioning of the services. Now it comes, okay, how can we address this challenges, or how can privileged access actually help it? I'll preface this with one statement that when we talk about enablement, especially from identity perspective, we always balance three things. We balance user experience, security, and cost. Cost meaning not necessarily from the financial perspective, but efficiencies and so on. So it's always those three key, I would say, pillars that we try to gauge which ones we can go through. So based on that, the priority changes in terms of which capability to enable first, right? So I would say if it's a very secure, if it's an organization client who puts the security first, and by meaning security first, it's having really regulatory requirements where requires more in-depth analysis and approvals for any access. That's where the privileged access capabilities with CyberArk can help, because it enforces those. It provides the monitoring capability that's needed, and how you isolate the session when it's needed for third-party access and so on. So it provides that I would say the ability to contain, but also to monitor the access in a continuous way. And what's needed, it's essentially to halt the session if needed. When it comes to developers, where we need access to applications, where organizations develop now new applications using APIs in a DevOps environment, those hard-coded credentials that Chris said as an example, those have to go away. So it's a blunt statement in terms of saying that's not an acceptable practice, right? There is no hard-coded. It happened in the past. Those legacies still exist, and organizations go through the cleanup and making it happen. But as a default, that shouldn't be as an experience anymore. So all the hard-coded credentials have to go away, and that's where the ability with the CyberArk to manage those credential and secrets in an agile manner, it's a critical capability. Another element I wanted to add is essentially on the user experience now side, is that, okay, we talked about the least privilege and stripping down the access so that users, just they have the minimal access, but that introduces a lot of friction. Going passwordless and going with capabilities such as MFA, that increased the user experience significantly, and in the same time provided that zero trust model, so that we know, so that we have that assurance and guarantee that the individual that using or accessing the particular object or application is a trusted one. So think from, I would say, from three perspectives. If it's a focused on the really security, then it's more on the side of isolating the sessions, monitoring the user behavior, monitoring the activities. If it's more on the user experience, so that's why the lifecycle processes and the MFA and step authentication comes into play. Because it's all automated, this is where the cost reduction comes into play. And again, we're not talking cost about the financial aspect here. We're talking about efficiency from the operations support perspective. We don't need calls to the service desk if we have MFA and we have an ability to self-manage those issues.
And it takes a strategy, right? It takes a strategy to kind of understand that, wow, this is a lot. I mean, I'm sitting here listening to you talk about all the different types of secure access that needs to be put into this privileged access management bucket. And I'm thinking about my old, solution engineering days when I was doing POCs 10 years ago of like, oh, you've got a hard-coded password in that script or that INI file. Yeah, let me show you how to remove that. Now it's a whole lot different. Now DevOps has come into play, and there's just so many more ways that a password can be hard-coded. So it definitely is nostalgic in a sense of just thinking about those olden days. But the strategy comes into play by having a plan, understanding that you can't just flip a light switch and everything just kind of works all at the same time. You kind of have to think about, where do I want to start, and what are the things that I need to make sure are in place. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is you got to defend against attacks. Like, that's just easy. That's a number one. Defending against attacks by saying we want to detect and onboard any unmanaged privileged identity. There's got to be a way of being able to put those bad boys in some way, shape, or form, a vault, or even if it's not in a vault, if it's not a static account, how do we give just-in-time access? How do we identify the users that are not protected by MFA? Well, give them an MFA, give them something that they can use. Thinking about another webinar that I'm doing in a few weeks and talking about passwordless. Doran, you brought that up, right? Where it's like, let's get rid of passwords as much as possible, because passwords just create fatigue in all the users, because, oh, I got a password for this and I got another password for this and we got another password for this. And there's two types of people. There's one person that's just going to take the fatigue and write down some of these passwords and have the good security practice that says that I have a different password for each one of my services, but they're tired of having to remember all of these different passwords, and essentially be able to say, well, wait a minute, I'm going to use the same password for every single one of those services. And that becomes a bit of a tricky situation. So we want to be able to remediate any type of misconfiguration that may have led to any other type of major breach. So understanding that that is in place, that helps us drive operational efficiencies. Pam making things easier doesn't really sound like a good sell, but it actually is. If I can utilize one password to identify myself and then use privileged access controls to get me where I need to be without having any type of firewalls or any type of misconfigured steps along the way, just make it easy for me to do my job. And I'm able to do that. And that's something that's going to help drive the operational efficiency of everybody's day-to-day work. Of course, that's going to help enable the business, because you're not slowing down DevOps processes. You're not slowing down people's the ability to use the cloud and the services that kind of come along with them, right? Because AWS invokes a new service. Oh man, that's really going to help our business for X, Y, and Z. Well, if security is telling you, no, you can't use that yet, that's going to slow down the business. So we want a way of being able to say, yes, go ahead and enable the business, do that service, utilize it to expand the business, but we want to make sure that it's protected, and having an easy way to protect it is something that is crucial. Now, of course, everybody has those compliance regulations that says, well, wait a minute, I need to know what you're doing. Even though you have control and the knowledge of how to set things up, we want to make sure that you're doing it in a sense that it is reportable, that it is compliant, and that it is a balanced way of looking at things, from security to operations. And then, of course, we've got our expert on the phone. So Doran, why don't you talk a little bit about how to make it a balanced approach, how to keep both sides of the spectrum as happy as possible?
Absolutely. So you brought up the strategy aspect, Chris, and I think this is key. But a lot of organization ask me, say, okay, what do you mean by having a strategy? What does it include? What is the fundamental components of that strategy that will enable me to have a better security or better user experience while moving into the cloud? I'll answer that question in a bit, but I just wanted to also preface a little bit that Canada as a government, the future is only digital. So even the Minister of Digital Government mentioned about the remote work and how everything it will be more digitally enabled. We know about the Canada digital ID program initiative. So Canada is investing a lot, and the future will always be the digital, will have a flavor of it. And that will be supported by cloud technologies, so that it can enable in a flexible way. So looking what Canada is doing, and also how we have as government agencies or entities to align with that vision. What should we do, right? So I always ask the question, why going to the cloud? Cloud means a lot of things. What do you want to achieve out of it? And it comes down to those fundamental principles that I said. So look, I want to serve my users, my employees with better experience, but I'm not compromising my security. Great. So this is where we talk about MFA, single sign-on experience, passwordless. Those elements that will dictate how the experience will become better. Some clients that I have, I say, look, user experience is important, but I'm concerned because of the IP that I'm managing and the data that I have underneath. I need to make sure that my security controls are better than just enough. They have to be top notch. So this is where we talk about then the shift of the strategy changes a little bit. Some clients ask, okay, well, I want to have all of the above, but I'm price sensitive for the next whatever time. I need a little bit of reduction in the cost and the operations. I want to be more efficient. Then the shift focus a little bit. So just playing, I would say playing, but just gauging through those the fundamental concept, what drives the need for the cloud strategy. It helps a lot how to lay it out the roadmap going forward, because we cannot do everything at once. Now, to get to that point, we have to balance the processes, the governance, the governance model with the technical capabilities. The nature of the cloud is different from the on-prem, just by looking from the perspective that it's a shared responsibility between the vendor and the customer, how the cloud providers define it. On top of that, if it's a multi-cloud environment, and most of the clients have at least one or two, every cloud provider has their own shared responsibility model. So they have to be somehow unified in a way that the organization understands what's under their responsibility versus the vendor. So creating that governance model to understand, now that I have a cloud provider that does a lot of service for me, what does it mean from my accountability perspective? And looking from the processes and technologies, how they coexist together, so we enable either user experience or cost efficiencies or security helps a lot.
Yeah, and just thinking about multi-cloud, right, is, I'm thinking if I was on the other side of these desks, right, it's like, oh wow, I'm really good at AWS, but I'm maybe not so good at Azure, and now I got to go out and kind of learn those different environments. So being tasked with making sure that all of those things are taken into consideration sometimes can be a little bit overwhelming, which leads us to like having a plan. What are the things that I want to focus on to start with? Right, these are the things at a very high level we need to consider. Things like cloud permission management. We need to make sure that permissions are in two-way, shape, or form. Two things are to consideration, right? Number one, can everybody do their job? Yes. Do they have the right permissions and not over excess on the permission stack to be able to just do their job? We have to think about securing access to cloud consoles, those platforms that we were speaking with, AWS, Azure, GCP, even into Office 365 and Salesforce and whatever that you might be using. Securing the elevated access to cloud management consoles, not just tying in MFA, SSO, which is super important for the day-to-day workforce, but the elevated access is something that needs to be guaranteed, controlled with some sort of management, some sort of security function. Now, of course, securing the cloud infrastructure, just because it's running in the cloud doesn't mean it's any less secure than, or even more secure than, things that might be running in a locked data center. So securing the cloud infrastructure, meaning AWS instances, VMs, etc., those things really need to be controlled, and then the infrastructure around them. So security groups and VPCs and all of these things, that the right rules are right there in place at all times. And then, of course, native applications and DevOps. This is a no-brainer, right? Is making sure that DevOps, the processes that surround DevOps, the containers that are being used, the orchestration tools, and any other DevOps tool that may be open source, because we know how many hundreds or even thousands of them are out there. We need to make sure that they have security controls that are consistent across the organization, and not islands of security where they own each of their own are maintaining their own infrastructure from a security perspective. And then, of course, down to the workforce users, of securing the SaaS applications, making sure that people can do their job to make the business move forward and make money for the company and make money for everybody. It's making sure that those SaaS applications are indeed secure. So With that in mind, right, these 5 key components, thinking about what should they protect. Before we start wrapping up, maybe just a little bit on what are the cloud services that are out there that you are seeing a lot of the customers kind of taking advantage of?
So it's a tough question, to be honest. So and it's I would say it's all of them. I have we've seen customers that consuming all the services in equal amount. What we try to say through this picture is that sometimes when we consume a cloud service, we I would say we work under the assumption that okay, it is secured, but and that's true. It is secure to the extent how it's been provided by the cloud provider or by an IT provider that you're consuming the service from. What needs to go beyond that a little bit is okay, the underneath, I would say, layers of the application, databases, network, and so on. How the identities that pertain to each of those services are actually managed. And again, it's because it's a shared responsibility between the consumer and the vendor with the cloud service provider. This is where some blurred lines happen, right? And as I said earlier when we started this conversation, now everything in the cloud has an identity, gaining that visibility on all those identities. And now, as I said, even the network is identity based in these times. That number is significant, that you cannot just do it manually. It has to be automated, because as the identity go up and down, sometimes they have a very short life cycle. You need to account for those, and you need to have visibility and control it in a way or another. Sometimes when we talk to the clients, the cloud concept is seen only through the lens of the cloud provider. We have to extend it a little bit, is because not just the cloud provider, is any applications or any services that we consume from the cloud. Just an example: Salesforce, Workday, and so on. You name it. So. Yep. How you gain that visibility across all your I would say consumption from the cloud and the identities is key. And now you have to go forward. So, okay, I have the visibility, but I need to manage it in a way that I have a saying how to dictate how those identities are being created, deprovisioned, managed, or controlled.
Yeah. So it's almost like use these 5 key components and kind of thought processes for all of this infrastructure, and hopefully it's not too overwhelming, right? So I know we just got a couple minutes left before I turn it back over to the IPSS team, but we're kind of thinking about that cloud journey and creating this identity security strategy for the cloud. You got to think about what you can and cannot see. We've got to secure everything, and you've got to understand what's out there. You know, identifying the access and the people and the non-people that are utilizing the cloud is something that's super important. You know, being able to ensure that least privilege model across all things that touch anything, whether it's human or non-human, is something that's super important. So, you know, think about all the things that we've talked about today. We're really excited to be able to speak with you, and please let us know if you'd like any type of follow-up. But Karen, I'm going to turn it back over to you to kind of wrap us up. But before I do that, I'm going to let Doran say a quick thank you. But just from my perspective, from CyberArk, on behalf of all of CyberArk, thank you so much for allowing us to talk with you today, and hopefully you gained a little bit of value here. But Doran, before I pass it over to Karen, the floor is yours, my friend.
I hope everyone enjoyed some of the thoughts that we shared with you. I know it might be a little bit overwhelming because it's a lot. It's a very broad topic. Our intent was just to open up a little bit the conversation about this domain, and just brush quickly through all of the elements with the intent that if you need a deeper dive, or you need some special conversation in any of that topic, we're happy to do that. So thank you for having us.
Yep, perfect. Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Doran and Chris. I really appreciate that. It was a very informative session, and thank you again for everyone's time and attention this past hour. Please know that CyberArk, Accenture, and IPSS, we all have a local Ottawa presence, so we will be following up with everyone in the coming days. If anyone would like a copy of the presentation, certainly reach out to us and let us know. Finally, if you'd like to reach out directly to anyone from CyberArk, Accenture, or IPSS, whether that's with a technical, sales, or a procurement vehicle question, please see all the contact information on the final thank you slide, which should be coming up shortly. And have a really wonderful afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for your time. And Chris and Doran, that was tremendous. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
There you go. We'll leave that slide up for everyone for a little bit. If anybody wants to take a screenshot of that, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks again. Bye-bye.